Alright, hi guys, full spoiler discussion. If you haven't seen Uglies, do not watch this video, but I watched Uglies, and it is Netflix's new young adult dystopian film, and I just need to talk about it because I thought it was absolutely absurd. This is obviously a movie, right, that is going for the overall message of beauty isn't everything. This is very clearly telegraphed from the start to the end, but unfortunately, in my opinion, the premise is so poorly delivered and so clunky that by the end of the movie, you're still kind of sitting there going, I feel like being a pretty is objectively the better option than remaining your true self. So let me get into why. So basically, the setup of this movie, right, is that it opens with one of those very typical young adult dystopian exposition dumps, right? Where like the narrator, the main character is like, 100 years ago, the gobbledygooks rose up against the gobbledygooks, and there was a war for resources, and eventually our overlords won, and they made this perfect society. And basically you find out that the reason there is this perfect society now is because at the age of 16, everyone is given the option or kind of forced to become a pretty, which means you undergo cosmetic surgery to look like your ideal self, and then you are put into this awesome rich people perfect society where everyone looks perfect and everyone's happy, and then you like kind of vibe for like 10 years, I think, and then after that you become what is called a middle pretty, which just basically means you're a really hot, really rich person who just gets to work like a normal 9 to 5 and then have kids and have a family, and then they go through that cycle. And on top of that, when you become a middle pretty, you are basically like given like a USB upload. It's like the Matrix. You're basically given all the skills you need to do that job. You don't even need to like study properly. So if you're anything like me, if you're a shallow, vapid asshole like me, you're probably sitting there going, this sounds awesome. Sign me up. You know, what I would give to have an alternate reality when I turn 16, instead of having any mental health concerns, any body image issues, I become awesome, hot, and rich, and slightly numb in the head, so I'm happy all the time. That sounds great. And the issue is, this movie doesn't do a really good job of dissuading you from that point, because the alternative of being a pretty is to remain an ugly, remain a normal person, right? And we see what this looks like, and it looks like shit. You basically have to hang out in the woods and like scrounge for resources and just complain about the fact that everyone's having a really good time and slightly numb over in the perfect pretty land. Like, sorry, the sort of like main mission of this movie, wanting to see this perfect privileged city be overthrown, isn't really that compelling, because in my opinion, and call me vapid, I think it's still objectively a better reality. Now, they do reveal to us, through the very typical leader of the runaways, of the Uglies, we find out that he was basically a guy that was like fundamental when the pretty paradise city was first made. And he found out that a few people actually start developing tumors, and that they're actually made to be emotionally numb. So that's like a side effect, a potential side effect of this pretty procedure, is some people get these tumors and die early. I'm sorry, I would still take the pretty procedure. Like, the alternative is potentially starving to death or being killed in the woods. Like, I'll take my chances with the potential brain tumor. Like, I mean, that just happens in everyday society anyway. Like, 50% of people get cancer in their lifetime. Sign me up still. Like, sorry. I find this movie really funny too, because when I first saw the premise and the poster and the trailer, I thought the movie was telling the story of a society where ugly people are killed. I thought it was literally a world where only the genetically beautiful people are allowed to remain in society and excel in society, and the ugly people are just brutally murdered. But no, it does not matter what you look like from birth. You are given the option to have any cosmetic surgery you want done. So if you have any deformities or any features you don't like, you get that removed at 16. So it's not even a particularly effective social satire or commentary on the fact that beautiful people normally have an easier ride in life than not beautiful people, because everyone just gets the option to get this cosmetic surgery. So it doesn't really matter how you're born if you are given this option at 16. So yeah, that's my main issue with this movie, is this idea that beauty isn't everything and it's what's on the inside that counts kind of falls apart just because logistically speaking, being beautiful in this society is objectively better. Even if it's not because you are literally beautiful, but because you actually get clear, like, quality of life privileges that the society gives you. And I'm sorry, like, an odd person getting a tumor here or there is a objectively better deal than the alternative of living in the woods and being starving all the time. General complaints, the CGI in this movie is actually garbage. It's actually gobbledygook. I know it's a very common thing to complain about Netflix CGI, but my God, they are really testing the limits of what can pass as an actual movie here and not a video game. Like, it's actually kind of insane. It reminds me of those really old, heavily CGI featured car commercials where the cars would like go past volcanoes or deal with like extraterrestrial monsters and it just didn't look very good. That's what this movie looks like. It's unbelievable. Like, look at this scene where Joey King does a backflip. Like, it's just rubber, people. It's insane.
You got it. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Yeah, not like that.
On top of that, one of my favorite scenes in this movie, right, is when Joey King puts on like a pig mask. Very subtle, I know. She puts on a pig mask to sneak into the pretty society, right? And she sees that her friend, her childhood friend that used to be an ugly, has now become a pretty. And she starts talking to him. And she takes off the pig mask, and for a while she's doing absolutely fine. Like, the society hasn't realized that she snuck into their like pretty perfect place, even though she's taken off the pig mask. So I thought the point of the movie was going to be, oh, she's actually like considered beautiful, and all of this is just a social construct, and like because she's blending in with everyone else. But then randomly, she just gets like scanned out of nowhere, and they're like, warning, warning, an ugly person has invaded the society. And then she's like, oh my God, they've realized I'm ugly. I have to go.
Yeah.
An unwelcome individual has been detected.
And then she like runs away, right? And she steals this thing called a bungee jacket. Now, I don't know about you, but what I expect a bungee jacket to look like when I hear that is she's probably going to jump off something high and then a parachute's going to come out, or it's going to have like wings and she glides down. No. What happens is she takes this bungee jacket, jumps out, and like face plants on a random force field that comes out of nowhere, and then like kind of bounces like a kilometer. And then like lands on concrete and just keeps running. Like, are her knees not completely shattered? Like, she somehow has superpowers. And it's also like the way it was visually presented, I had to go back. I was so confused because I was like, did the bungee jacket do anything? It looked like she just hit a force field that was around the city, but I guess the bungee jacket was what made that force field. And then somehow she just has superhuman knees that don't explode on impact. Another thing I love is she has a friend who is called Skinny. Oh yeah, by the way, all our uglies call each other by their like worst trait that they can't wait to change. So Joey King's character is referred to as Squint due to her squinty eyes. One of her friends is called Nose, and then her other friend is called Skinny. So Skinny, right, is kind of like against joining this society. She's really like, no, I'm never getting this surgery. You should join me and live out in the woods, right? And she teaches her how to like hoverboard and introduces Joey King's Squint to this like society of people that do not sign up to the pretty procedure, right? But my favorite part of this movie is at the end, right? So Skinny gets abducted and she is forced to become a pretty against her will. And then it's like this horrifying reveal. It's meant to be this absolutely devastating reveal when they're like, we found your friend and we've made her perfect. And you're expecting this horrifying shell of a person to come out. But she comes out, she looks snatched. She's like an 11 out of 10. She's super happy. And she's like, yo, I love it here. And at that point, it's like the movie's not working because I'm like, this looks awesome. I'm sorry, like maybe I'm shallow, but... Like Joey King and her friends like, oh my God, Skinny, what have they done to you? And she's like, babe, I feel great. It's so good. It's so good. Like, again, like just not working.
Do you love it?
I gotta be first because I made the most trouble.
Also, I know the point of the movie is that basically most of our main characters aren't actually ugly, but society calls them uglies. Like, I do understand that. It's not lost on me. But I do love that when she runs out to the society of uglies, not only is everyone not like average looking, but they are all basically Abercrombie and Fitch models. Like, the guy, the love interest she gets, is so unbelievably hot. And it's like, how's he moisturizing? How's he working out? He's living out in the woods. They should all look like raggedy homeless people. And his parents, absolute smoke shows. Insane. One of my favorite plot holes towards the end of the movie is that the wilderness society, the uglies that are living out in the woods, discover a cure for the pretty curse, right? So basically what it means is if you get transformed into a pretty and there's that risk of getting that brain tumor, they've developed a cure for that potential tumor. So you get to stay really pretty and hot, but you also don't have the like 5% chance of getting a tumor. So they've come up with that cure and they want to give it to people. But the issue is they need a lab rat to check that it actually works. And unfortunately, they were going to do it on Skinny, but now that Skinny has been transformed into a hot person, they can't get her informed consent because it's like, is she too dumb and stupid and a bimbo to actually be able to consent? Like, does she know what she's consenting to? So they can't do it on her. She wasn't able to consent. And now that she's a pretty, she doesn't want to be an ugly, right? Whatever. What Joey King proposes is, hey, I'll become a pretty. I'll like give myself up. They'll turn me into a pretty. I've got a scar on my hand that has sentimental value. If I still have this scar on my hand after the surgery, that is consent to do this treatment on me. Even if my current self, my pretty dumb self, does not consent to it, this is consent. Okay, here's the thing, right? So first off, morally, right? I don't agree. If Joey King's character becomes a pretty, if she still has that scar on her hand, that means she is consenting. Even if she says no, even if her current brain doesn't let her kind of approve the surgery, the scar on her hand does. And I'm sorry, this is still as morally questionable as giving the cure to Skinny. In my opinion, there's a greater good here and you just give the cure to them either way. But if we're following the moral logic of not giving the cure to Skinny, you can't give the cure to Joey King either, because even if she has the scar on her hand as a sign of consent, she is verbally not consenting. If she does not have the brain power, if she is not in the state of mind to say, hey, I want this surgery, do it to me, but she has a scar that she can't even remember the meaning of, that is not consent. And I know this because I've been listening to the discourse around consent as a guy in our society for the past 5 years, and I know that if someone says yes to something yesterday, last week, last year, or 4 minutes ago, but currently they are saying no, that is not consent. So it does not matter. Like, I don't get it. Because if she goes through the surgery as normal Joey King before getting like the bimbo brain transplant and all the cosmetic surgery done, if she comes out of that cosmetic surgery and now looks at her hand and doesn't know the meaning of the scar, that means she also does not consent to the surgery. So the good moral choice here to not give the cure to Skinny is undone because you're going to give it to Joey King anyway. Just give it to both of them and morally justify it in your head as the greater good. It's so silly. And you can tell they think this is like a really smart ending, but it's not. And again, that whole message of like, it's what's on the inside that counts does not work because being pretty in this society is such a better choice. Like the whole movie, right? I was waiting for them to sneak into the pretty society and just see like a sea of like awfully like checked out miserable people that don't even know they're miserable, but everyone seems happy. Even her friend Nose seems objectively happier, and the only reason he becomes weird and kind of like brain dead is because he starts getting controlled and manipulated and basically turned into a robot by the evil society to like bring in Joey King. But everyone else, right, who isn't involved in like political scheming, everyone else in the pretty society that is just vibing for the next 10 years are actually happy. They seem like a vibe. It seems like a better option than the Wilderness Society. This movie just does not work. It fundamentally does not work. And I know this is the premise set up in the book. I have a suspicion the book must have done it better because as an audience member, I do not think this movie did a good job of selling me on the initial premise at all. Needless to say, I did not like this movie. Also, I need to rant about young adult dystopian movies. First off, I'm so sick of these opening exposition dumps. You know, 100 years ago, the Society of Booby Blobs rose up against the Garble Goobs. Like, you can skip them. All right. Basically, all you ever need to know in these movies is like there's a seemingly perfect society that isn't so perfect, or it is unfair to the people that aren't in the upper echelons of this perfect society. You know, Hunger Games made it interesting because you're watching these people interact with the upper echelon of society and enter this arena. Super, super interesting. But like all these other runs, right? Like Maze Runner, Divergent, Host, like I'm so over them. And it's all just like, oh, we're either in the perfect society or we're out in the woods where we wear these annoying jumpsuits that are always gray with these like kind of like NRL like chess pieces. It's so boring. Like all the visual design is so ugly in these movies. It's all awful, ugly, grey CGI backdrops. And all of these dystopian movies, all the costume design for the poor people is always the same. Whenever they're thrown into force fields, they like bang it and it comes up with that orange or blue hexagon representation of them hitting a force field. Like how many times do we need to see it? You know, all the spaceships look the same. It's just so dull. Like it does not matter in these dystopian movies, aside from Hunger Games. I do really like Hunger Games. But in all these young adult dystopian movies, it doesn't matter if it's a maze or it's divergent classism or any of that, because you always end up the same. Once they leave that really interesting high concept sci-fi premise, what do you end up with? What do you get? You get a bunch of people in this grey activewear with these hexagonal designs, and they're just vibing in the woods or vibing in caves or vibing in the rain or vibing near a beach, going, oh my God, we need to get back to the society and overthrow the overlord. And you just sit there for the middle hour waiting for the movie to do anything. But instead, what do you have to watch? You have to watch these love triangles between generic hot guy A and generic hot guy B. And there is one generic hot guy that is objectively the better choice than the other generic hot guy. And you're just waiting for the main character to go, oh, I better pick the good generic hot guy over the bad generic hot guy. And all of them do it. This movie does it. She has to pick between Nose and this awesome hot guy that like is awesome, right? And is going to overthrow the society and is hot and resourceful and caring and is not being transformed into a weird pretty robot. Like who do you think she's going to choose? It's just so dull. The only interesting thing here was it was clearly alluding to the idea that Skinny / Shay kind of had the hots for Joey King. At least that's how I read it. And they didn't do anything with it. Queer baiting, called out. But yeah, really disappointing movie. Really disappointing movie. Don't watch Uglies. It was bad.